example, fairly straightforward and easy to do. These could be fetches as well. So I've got P1, P2, P3. My three promises, they are functions, and normally we do P1, make the call to that, then, and then have my function. And then I could do the same thing for P2 and P3. So we'd have all three of these. And then there's three separate functions that are running at three separate times, and I have no idea which one's going to run first. Let's say that's not going to meet the needs of my web page. I need to do something where don't make any updates until all three of these things. Maybe I want to use the tweets related to these users. Maybe I need to have information about the users or the tweets before I display the weather. Whatever the case is, we're not going to individually look at these. What we want to do is use the promise.all method. It's going to be expecting an array. What are the promises that you want to be met? Give me a list of all of the promises that have to be met. So, call to P1, call to P2, call to P3. Those are my three promises. Now, they don't have to be functions. We could just do this. Say P3 is equal to that, and then P3 is no longer a function call, just to show you that it does work that way. Promise.all says, here's the list when all of these have been met, when they're all resolved, not rejected. None of them can be rejected for this to work. Every one of them has to be resolved. Then, and inside my function here, I will have a results array. This function now will have access to an array of results. So we can, in any order we want, because we have all the results now from all three promises, we can say, I want to write out the results array. We'll do number 1. And then I'll do number 0, and then I'll do number 2. So I should get, when this runs, the tweets, then the user, then the weather being displayed. So let's take a look at that. There we go. Tweets, users, weather. And that's all it takes. So you can define your promises anywhere you want in the code, and then define this all method so that you pass in an array of all the promises that you want to use. When all 3 of them, or 4 of them, or however many you have, even if it's just 2, when they are all resolved, this function will run, and this will be an array of the responses from each of these things. And you can use that however you like. As always, questions, please leave them in the comments.
I have 12 emails, 30 messages, and a proposal due by 10. How am I already underwater?
I'm in the...
All right, one more thing that you can do with promises. Similar to the promise all, where you can send out multiple promises, multiple fetch calls, whatever you want, and your finishing function won't run until all of the promises have been resolved. There's also a method called race, where you can send out one or more promises, and only the result from the first one gets used. So you can attempt a whole bunch of different things, and as soon as one of those things work, then your code can run. So here I've defined 3 different variables for promises. First one, I'm just calling the reject method, so it's always going to fail. P1 will always fail, and 111 will be the result for that. P2 is always going to work immediately. 222 is going to be the result from that, and P3 has a timeout. So it's going to call the resolve method after 1 second, and 333 will be its result. If you're not sure about the syntax for set timeout, I'll put the link in the comments for the set timeout video so you can see how those work. Alright, so these promises, I want to do a race. I'm going to say, okay, fire these 3 things off and give me the result for the first one that comes back. So promise.race, very similar to the promise.all. Inside of here we provide an array, an iterable, where we would put in P1, P2, P3. Now, in my example here, what's going to be happening is, because they are all, well, the first 2 are immediately resolved, I'm going to have an answer immediately from number 1 and 2. Number 3 is always going to happen about a second later. So I need to have catch to handle any time that a reject happens. My then will handle any of the resolve calls. So results, do my fat arrow function, and then catch, same sort of thing. Whatever value is passed back, I'm going to call this function. Inside of here, we're just going to do a simple console.log and winning, and the results. Inside here we'll say console.log failed, and the results. So I'm doing these in order. So what I'm going to expect to see is P1 is the first thing it's going to attempt. It has been rejected immediately, so I'm going to get this 111, but it's going to call the catch, so I should see, when I run this, there, failed, 111. Now I'm going to change the order of these. I'm going to put P2 first, and then P1 second. Run this again. There. Number 222 has won the race. And if I switch this again to, say, put number 3 first, that's the one that runs after a second, I get the failure, because P1 comes first before P2. And if we change the order one more time, before P2, the failure, because P1 comes first before P2. And if we change the order one more time, you can hear my cat and my dog fighting in the background there, I think. There we go. Winning, 222. Well, I guess they're not fighting. My dog is trying to play with my cat, and the cat's having none of it. So we've got P3, P2, P1. P3 was the wait a second, P2 was the immediately resolved, P1 was the immediate failure. So because this is delayed, but this is immediate, this is the one that's going to win. Now, I knew the results for each one of these because I know how long these are going to take. If you're doing things like fetch and other asynchronous calls, oftentimes you don't know how long they're going to take. So the race is set up so that, all right, I'm making 3 AJAX calls out to 3 different resources. I don't know which one's going to come back first, but I'll use whichever one comes back first. That's really what this comes in. Most of the time, this order is not going to matter. Here, because I set this up in a very specific way to immediately reject or resolve or come back at a specific time, I was able to change the order just to show that this was working. As always, if you've got questions, please post them in the comments. All right, I'm going to explain how to use the new fetch method for doing AJAX calls in less than 5 minutes. So let's get underway. I have a sample web page here. I have a div that I've given the ID output to, and inside of it I've got some pre-tags for pre-formatted text. The reason I've got that is I'm going to fetch some JSON and I want to display it in a formatted way. All right, this is the sample data that I'm going to get. So how do I use fetch, the fetch method, the new promise-based way to do AJAX calls? Well, at its most simple, that's it. We're done. We have now, if I save that, I come over here and I run my page. I've done it. I've actually made a request, sent it off to a server, and I've got back the data. And if I bring up the console here, but if we go into the network tab, right here, if I refresh this page, you can see here's the page that I requested, and right there, this is the data. It's back from the server. Now, I'm not doing anything with the data that came back. I'm not doing anything with the file that came back, but I have made the request. So how do I work with the stuff that comes back? Come inside here, and I can make a whole series of these then method calls. And at the very end, I add a catch. Then is the method that handles the response that comes back. And then if this has a function inside of here and it has a return statement, it will pass it on to here. If this has a return statement, it passes on to the next then, and so on and so on. We can make a chain of as many then methods as we want. And all we have to do is have a return at the end of each one. That will continue to travel down this chain till it gets to the very end. The catch listens for an error. If there is an error anywhere along the chain, it automatically jumps over to the catch. So what do we put inside each of these? We put a function. And because ES6 is easier to write and faster to write, we're going to use ES6 functions. So I've got a response object. That's what's going to be passed into my function. This request will give me back the file. This response holds that file. I want to take the file and say, hey, give me the JSON data that's inside of it. So the response object actually has a method called JSON. Now my ES6 function is going to return the value of this. So I'm getting the JSON data being passed on to my next function. And then inside here, I can do whatever I like. Now, just to keep this simple, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it out inside these pre-tags. And I'm going to use the JSON stringify method. Inside the stringify method, I'm going to pass in my JSON object. There's no function I'm going to call, and I want to add tabs at the start of each one of these lines. That's what this function is going to allow me to do. There we go, just like that. Inside the catch, I will be passed an error object. Inside the error object, there's a name property. So let nm equal that. This is the type of error, so like a type error. And let message equals error dot message. This is the error message. And then we can alert that out. So this is coming from the catch. And we're going to write out those two variables, nm and msg. There we go. So if there is an error, that will pop up. All right, document.querySelector target the output div with the pre-tag inside of it, and we set its text content equal to our variable str. There we go. There's the data back from the server. And if instead you wanted to use some of the data, we could, instead of doing that line, we could do something like document query selector output dot text content. Run that again. There we go, 42. That was the first post ID that we got. So we can extract the data, or we can look at the text, either way you want to do it. And if we made a mistake in here, let's say we had the wrong URL, run that. Here's the catch running. Type error was the type of error, failed to fetch, that was the message. We failed to get it. And that's it. that is how fetch works. So good luck with that. Have lots of fun with your Ajax. All right, today I want to talk about synchronous and asynchronous functions in JavaScript, and the fact that JavaScript is a single-threaded language. Now, we have a new thing called service workers that were added a few years ago, but that aside, the majority of the JavaScript that you're going to be writing is being run as a single process in your computer. And that means, for the most part, you write your code top to bottom in kind of a procedural way. Looking at this example here, I'm declaring a couple of variables here. So I've got my shortcut for the console.log statement. That's just to be able to write things out here. But we have a couple of variables, A and B. I want to run this line of code and then this line of code. And by default, that is what JavaScript is going to do. It's going to want to execute this line and then execute this line. Now, leaving aside the fact that there's hoisting and these variables will be declared up at the top in the first pass and then the second pass we're assigning the values, it's still running from a top to bottom kind of way. That allows us to do things like this. I've got a variable here and I'm setting it equal to a function. The function will return the value 5, the second function will return the value 50. Now I run these functions one after the other and not a problem. If I needed to use the value here before B1, that's not a problem. I can insert something inside here. I can take the value that's coming back from this function before I move on to the next line. There is a delay that happens here. I'm putting this inside here. So any expression that I want can be assigned inside of this before the next line of code executes. This can be an expression. I can turn this into an immediately invoked function expression, doing this. And then I can do the same thing on the next one. Now I am running this line of code, which means I'm running this function and I'm getting the value 5 and I'm putting it into here before I move on to the next line. JavaScript wants to do this. It wants to execute things in order. So we change this now so the values A1 and B1 are no longer functions.
So there is a function create point. Signing up. Okay. But I said, come to me. Well, I set fire in the rain. Mm-hmm.